In this episode, I talk with Anjie Cho, architect and feng shui educator. We talk about specific practices to tap into your everyday magic, beauty, and potential through nature, flowers, meditation, relationships, the 5 elements, and all the ways the world communicates with you. Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flowerlounge Podcast. I have with me here Anjie Cho, who's an architect, a feng shui educator, and author of Holistic Spaces, 108 Ways to Create a Mindful and Peaceful Home. She's the owner of Anjie Cho Architect, co-founder of the Mindful Design Feng Shui School, and founder of Holistic Spaces, which hosts a blog, a podcast, and an online store. Anjie is also an assistant teacher of Dharma arts and meditation in the beautiful Shambhala Buddhist lineage. So excited to have you here, Anjie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, Katie.
So we always start off the podcast with a little exercise. And so you just close your eyes and go back to your childhood, to a time when you played around flowers or plants or trees, and reflect on what might have been your favorite at the time and what you were up to. And if you could describe the personality of your favorite flower or botanical from that time, reflect on what would be the 3 words you would use. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and share what you were up to and what you're thinking about, what your favorite is, and the 3 words.
So I had a memory of when I was pretty young. I guess it was probably before I went to school. And our grandmother, my paternal grandmother, lived with us and was raising my sister and I while my parents were working, and she lived with us. And so she's, Korean grandmother. And I remember we lived in Los Angeles and we would walk along to the trees. Well, actually, now I'm remembering something else too. But anyway, and she would forage things just from the street, I guess, for food. So I remember we would pick up acorns. And so we would, do the Asian grandmother squat together. And she would open up her skirt and we would collect acorns and put them in her skirt.
Wow.
Yeah, and then she would make something called, I think she made bindetok out of it, because you would take the internal part of the acorn, the meat of the acorn, and then grind it and make that into a paste that you put into this Korean dish. And then it also made me think about, we would drive up to Big Bear because that's the only way people in LA see snow. Probably similar in Phoenix, where there's a mountain nearby where you can see snow. And we would stop off the side of the road and she would see some fern. I can't remember what kind of fern it is. Maybe it's like a fiddlehead or something. And we would also gather those. And there's a Korean dish called gosari, which you marinate the fern. So it was wonderful how she found these things in nature and we would collect them.
Wow, that is amazing. So how would you describe the acorn personality, or in 3 words? And then after that, how would you describe the fern in 3 words?
Okay. The first one that popped into my mind for the acorn was the potential and intensity and compact, which is also kind of similar. And for the fern, verdant, spiraling, and earthy.
I love it. It's so beautiful. Okay, so because what we find is that the 3 words you would use to describe your childhood favorite would describe the way that you bring your greatest gifts into this world. And so for you, it would be compact intensity and potential, and verdant, spiraling, and earthy. It sort of reminds me of your architecture work. Spiraling.
Yes, thank you.
And spiraling because you're like all over the place doing so many different things. Holy moly. You just launched a book last year. You just launched a mindful design school. You offer feng shui services to people. You do meditation through flower arranging and other Dharma arts.
And I'm an architect.
And you're an architect.
It seems all over the place, but it's really...
Actually, it's all connected.
Okay, good. Yeah, because that's like Chogyam Trungpa would say that it's about having art in your everyday life.
Let's talk about that. He's one of my favorite teachers. Of course, I have friends who, were like little boys running around in the community when he was still alive. I didn't have the great fortune of meeting him, but I love his work and I love his books. And we often quote him in the LOTUSWEI Instagram because he's just so brilliant and brought so many gifts from the East to the West in a way that was so fresh and different. Let's talk about living your art every day. What does that mean?
Well, I also was not able to meet him, but my meditation instructor, David Nichtern, and my flower mentor and teacher, and she's my primary mentor, Marcia Shibata, they were both students of Chogyam Trungpa, and I'm very fortunate to also be surrounded by a lot of his senior students here in New York, and a lot of them were artists. What I hear is that he was truly an artist and wanted to bring to the West a few concepts, and he was really able to transform them to adapt to Western thinking. And it's quite interesting for me because I'm of Eastern descent. However, I have Western teachers that were taught by Eastern teachers, and it's wonderful because Marcia says, Anjie, like, this is what the Vidyadhara talked about all the time, is that eventually we would bring it back to the East, and you're able to really put one foot on each side in the East and the West to be able to connect the two, and that's what he was able to do. So this idea of living art in everyday life is that in one of his talks, he talks about even when you make a cup of tea, that in itself can be a meditation. And really that, I think the most influential thing that he's taught me is that we have everyday magic in our lives, and it doesn't have to be anything special. It could be very mundane, like making a cup of tea or brushing your teeth, but there's magic and beauty and potential.
Oh, I love that. And how do you in particular live that as like almost a mantra every day? Like, how do you live your art every day? What are the little things that you see as your practice or your art?
The first thing that pops into my head is really more of a mindset, is seeing the world as a mirror. So for instance, my husband and I got in a little tiff the other day. And he always falls asleep while watching movies, and I always get upset. And it's been years of this. So I know. And then, but it only dawned on me like the other day, I realized, wait, how is this, what do I have to learn from this? How is this a mirror? And you could even visualize a real mirror. Like, what does this show me? And I realized, why am I so upset? And it's not about him. It's about me and what can I do? And so it's really a gift that he can show me some aspect of myself to work on in a safe place where it's, my husband, he's not going to divorce me over this, and I can explore that. And so it can be even something as simple as changing your shifting your mind and visualizing how someone is mirroring what you can learn and improve. But it can also be taking a moment to really feel when you're walking outside. So I'm typically rushing everywhere. I'm very speedy, but stopping, noticing, like when I take my dogs out, noticing at the park every day, how is everything shifting? How are things changing? Oh, that flower wasn't there, or this tree looks different than it did a few days ago. And just noticing how wonderful life is, and what and also what the messages are there for us. And that's what Chogyam Trungpa talked about a lot too, that there's so many messages that the universe wants to give to us. We just need to slow down and be able to open our eyes and be awake to see them.
Okay, just going back to that example, since you brought it up, your husband, right? Okay, so just like walk us through how you do that exercise in your head of him being a mirror. So do you ask yourself, like, what is it that bothers me about him falling asleep? Is it that he's not present? Is it we're not experiencing something together? Is it like, do you take it? Can you walk us through like how you came to some insight?
Sure. In this particular situation, I think that I've practiced enough to know that, okay, I'm feeling upset and I'm not going to try to shut down the feeling of upset. So that's the first step, to feel the feeling and not turn it into a storyline, but feel the feeling and instead of suppressing the feeling. So this feels this way to me, and then to explore the feeling. And then I realized what my reaction was, that I was kind of mean and I spoke to him very sternly, and I woke him up. I'm like, why are you sleeping? And, and then I realized why am I upset? And the thought was, okay, what can I learn from the situation? What is it mirroring in me? If I walked in and Katie Hess was sleeping, I would not yell at her and I would let her sleep. I would say, oh, okay, she must be tired. So I realized, okay, first I look at what I would do for anyone else. So, because it's definitely a loaded situation when it's someone you're close to, like family or your partner. And then I looked at how I'm treating him differently. And then I looked at how I could have acted differently, so that I could have just let him sleep because maybe he needs sleep. And then I looked at myself, I've been very sleepy lately too. And I wouldn't appreciate it if someone woke me up and I was disoriented and they started yelling at me. And then I go inner and I said, okay, well, why does it bother me so much? Do I feel neglected? Do I feel like I am alone, that I don't have someone I can count on? And then I started to think about what my teacher, Marcia, would always say. And she said that Chogyam Trungpa always told her and reminded her that we are always alone. We're all alone together, which is a paradox, right? But
yeah.
But, and she's also taught me, you have to take care of yourself. One time she was staying here with me and we had to leave for a class, and we had set a time to wake up. And then I woke up late and I ran outside and she wasn't in my apartment anymore. And so I was like, oh no, what happened? Where did she go? And she doesn't have a cell phone because she's like an old lady. And I went to the Shambhala Center and I got there and I said, Marcia, why didn't you wake me up? And she just looks at me like directly and says, I'm not responsible for you.
Oof.
I know. But we're all alone. That's the teaching. We're all alone. We're only responsible for ourselves. So that takes me back to this experience with my husband. I feel alone. I'm responsible for myself, but also we have this paradox of that we're all together and interrelated and interconnected. So then I went over to my husband and I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. And I'm sorry I spoke to you like that. And it wasn't very nice. And it's not the words were very harsh. And this is where I'm coming from. And I said, I'm going to work on changing this.
It's really sweet.
Yes. Well, I think it was a big jump for me because it just dawned on me after I don't know, I think we've been together at least 10 years.
And he's been falling asleep to movies probably for 10 years, right?
I think for 40 years, for his whole life. His sister does it too.
So it's just something that happens. It's so funny how, like, you know, it's like something that's so, like you said, like something that's so ordinary and mundane. This is kind of like a flipped example, but we like will turn it into this, it like hits a tender spot in us somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's such a gift to be able to find those tender spots and work through them, because otherwise, how would we know they're there?
Yes, like if we didn't have challenges or irritating people in our lives, then we would just lead these really stagnant, boring lives where nothing ever happened. We could be like a lump of clay, not doing anything. And what kind of life is that?
Right. There are so many like good old stories, right, about the masters inviting like the most challenging characters with them on trips and things.
Oh, yeah, the Bengali tea boy.
So that they would have to like evolve and face that.
Yeah, my teacher's so funny. I was like, oh God, I think I have another Bengali tea boy. And she said, welcome to the Bengali tea club. If you have under 20, you get a discount.
Do you want to tell that story?
Sure. Well, it's like you said, there's a Buddhist story that there was a famous Buddhist teacher that would travel with this Bengali tea boy that apparently he smelled really bad. He was always late. He never got the tea on time. He was irritating. And everyone was like, why do you travel with this Bengali tea boy? He's so irritating. And we don't want to be around him. And so the teacher said,
I love that he smells bad too. That's
the teacher said that actually the Bengali tea boy reminds him of why he's doing what he's doing, and he's his greatest teacher. And I always remember that even in the hardest challenges, that we have the most opportunity for the greatest rewards. And actually I was listening to Esther Hicks recently, and she said the most irritating people are the ones actually closest to you, that you really know the most energetically, because they're here to work with you to create transformation.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And they can root out those little tender places. Mm-hmm. That's great. And I know you and I have talked in the past about the art of flower arranging. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that can be a practice and how it can be something profound?
Sure, I'd love to. One of my nearest and dearest Buddhist practices, is contemplative flower arranging. And I was always drawn to flower arranging, except I never actually took a class. And when I finally did, it was in the Shambhala lineage. And it was presented to me as a meditation in action and a way to see the entire universe in one container. So traditionally, Ikebana was a representation of nature and developed in the East in China and then brought to Japan. And they were arrangements that were presented in Buddhist temples, and monks created them. And so there's many different schools, but the way that my teacher Marcia teaches, so she has her own school. I study in two schools. I study in Ikonobo, which is the oldest school of Ikebana, and then I have my Shambhala teacher. So I have like a secular teacher, and then I have a Buddhist flower teacher.
That's great.
So the way that Marcia teaches flower arranging in the contemplative practice is that it's not about creating a beautiful arrangement, but it's about studying yourself. So it's just like meditation, where when you're sitting and working with flowers, you start to see your own mind as you would in sitting practice. And it's interesting how very quickly you get this feedback from the universe. These are the messages that we miss. So if you're speeding through something, you break the stem, or you cut yourself, or the whole thing falls over. And then the same feelings come up where you start to compare yourself. I remember the first time I took a class with Marcia, she came over and she said, well, how are you feeling about your arrangement? And I had been looking around at everyone else's because, of course, I always finish first because I'm like very fast. So I finished first and I'm looking around. I'm like, oh no, mine doesn't look as good as theirs. I'm not doing it right. And all of those things that come up are self-doubts. It just arises. And Marcia looks at me and she says, never compare yourself with others. So there's so many great teachings that come from working with flowers, all the insecurities, but also there's working with impermanence, because the flower is dying once it's cut. And how do you work with that? But there's also the aspect of seeing all the seasons. It's so rich.
It's profound. Tell me more about seeing the entire universe in one container.
So in a traditional Buddhist or a traditional Ikebana arrangement, there's the components of heaven, earth, and humanity, which are three. It's a principle that was developed in Taoism to look at the unfolding of nature. And so these three guiding principles are the bones of an Ikebana arrangement. And there's also all five elements are represented in a flower arrangement. Like there's a sun line. So that represents the sun and fire. And then there's actually water. There's water in the container. There's water in the plant material, and the wood and plant material, because it's all living flowers and living material. There's the container actually represents earth, because it's grounded and it's stabilizing, and it holds the whole arrangement, which is earth energy. And there's air around. So this is the five elements in like the five Buddha families in the Tibetan system. So there's air all around, and then earth. Which one did I miss? There's Buddha.
Fire is the flower.
Fire is the sun.
Oh, the sun, right?
And wind. Wind is the air around it.
So when it kind of reminds me almost of, like, I don't know if you're familiar with mandala offerings, where it's like this Tibetan practice where you visualize like all the most beautiful things, and you're offering it to like the enlightened beings and all beings, and everyone's satisfied, and it's this incredible like feast of generosity in a sense. And it kind of reminds me of like when you say the entire universe in one container. It's almost like with the arrangement, you're like creating this incredibly beautiful, magical world as like an offering.
Yes, it is an offering. It is a mandala, but it has all those facets in it. I know that's Vajrayana practice, right?
Uh-huh.
I haven't taken a Vajrayana teacher actually, so I have not done mandala practice, but I've seen it. I mean, I haven't seen it. I've seen the shrines.
And is that, I guess the question is like, where is your heart when you're arranging? Like, is that where your heart is? Does it feel like an offering? Or are you more coming from just like a peaceful observation of your own mind?
It can be both. And I think it does connect with your heart because you're so in touch with it. And then you have to let it go too.
Yeah.
You take it. Actually, in flower practice, you put the whole thing together, and you may spend a couple hours on this, and then you just take it, just like the sand mandalas, you take it apart right away, and you do it mindfully, like one stem at a time. You don't just grab it by the throat and pull it all out. You take one stem at a time. And even with the cuttings, you don't just throw them in the trash with your coffee grounds and with your normal trash.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
also
that
an
feels
offering.
so wrong.
Yes, you take the or even the expired flowers,
Mhm.
you cut them into small pieces, and then you put them in like a piece of paper, and then you fold that, and then you can offer that to the trash, because even that is a sacred way to dispose of this offering that you've created.
Oh, I love the idea of putting it in paper. That's so sweet. I know that
Yeah.
every time we make, those huge flower mandalas for events, we can never throw the petals away ever. Just like ugh, goes against my skin. It's like we do like flower offerings typically on the next day where we toss them into the river or a lake or the ocean or something. And even like I made mandalas and offerings for my dog who passed a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And when the petals dry up and like we would put fresh, like I still like I can't toss those. Like they're like in the fridge now, so I have to decide how I like
Oh.
where I offer them or like where I sprinkle them. But that's such a sweet idea. If you're like in a pinch, making this beautiful offering into a little envelope, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's really sweet.
Yeah, Marcia told me that in Japan they even have cemeteries, like Shinto cemeteries, for the flower cuttings and expired flower arrangements, because they're all alive, and you honor that too. So it's a sacred way to dispose of that. But also putting in water is great, because in feng shui there's a lot of exercises and adjustments where you make offerings to water, because it's letting it go to the universe instead of um, like
Holding,
water, yeah, instead of holding.
pressing.
So it's letting the water take it away. It needs to be water that's moving. Or there's also an alternate option sometimes, that you can bury it at the base of a tree,
Mm.
so then it can become part of the tree and continue to grow.
Let's talk about water moving into water.
Okay.
Tell us about water and water in our space and what we can do with water and your relationship to water and any tips you have for water in our life and what that means.
Okay. Well, I personally love water. I always live near water. I grew up in California, and I lived in San Francisco and Berkeley, and now I live literally on the East River in New York City. So I love being around water, and it makes sense because my Chinese astrology, my day master is, so my primary element is wood, and wood is fed by water. So it really makes sense. Like, I like to ask people, if you could go anywhere, where would you go? If like, what's the first thing that pops into your head? And for me, it's always like the beach or near water. So that really can give you some information on what kind of elements support you, versus water versus earth versus wood, metal, or fire. So if you really like things really hot, maybe you need fire. If you like things, you like to be in the woods, maybe your wood supports you. So water really supports me, and I love water. And in feng shui, water is an interesting element because it relates to a couple different things, because water can either be still, and still water represents depth of knowledge, it represents intelligence and wisdom. And we talk about how you could be wide and shallow or narrow and deep, and not that one's better or worse, but that's a way to look. You can metaphorically look at water and your level of knowledge and how you interact with the world. And then there's also moving water, like a rushing river. And that is related to wealth and abundance, as well as your social connections and your social network and how you relate to the world. So water has a lot of different dynamics, and it has a lot of potential to clarify as well as connect. So it's used a lot in feng shui adjustments in different ways. And you don't really need to necessarily have water elements. Like, you don't have to have a fountain. That's kind of just one of those what we call them, Barnes and Noble type of answers. It's just the ones that you can look up. But there's unique things, because since I live by the water and I live by the East River, which is actually a strait, so it connects, I think it connects Long Island Sound to the ocean. So it's salt water and it's always changing current. And so there's a lot of movement, and there's actually boats that go in there a lot. And so that makes sense, like where water really creates that connection. So anyways, I have views of the water. So something like I do is like I have view of the water, then I have a mirror facing the window, so then it reflects the view of the water over like the wealth area of my desk, or views of the water in my kitchen, like it's reflected over my stove, which also represents wealth. So there's a lot of ways that you can work with the water element. It doesn't really have to be you put a fountain in in this area,
in the lucky corner.
yes. I mean, that I'm sure those things work too, but there's also very enhanced methods that you can use. But even being around water is really helpful for a lot of people.
I like how you describe it as sort of like becoming aware of your own inclinations, like where would you be any place in the world, and what elements make you feel nourished, and how and when. I think like a lot of people may gain insights into their own systems, so to speak, or ecosystems that could connect to feng shui if we, just sort of observed more how the elements affect us. Like probably we're doing it all the time, right? Like someone who, like you said, someone who needs metal, they may find themselves drawn to wearing jewelry, and right.
Exactly.
And just kind of doing it intuitively.
Yes, exactly. Because I think where things get a little bit more challenging is that when you start to look for a prescription or an equation like A plus B equals C, and you read something and you try to do everything, and then you get very overwhelmed, and it gets muddied. But really just listening and tuning into what makes you feel supported is really important. So sometimes your own answer, like where do you feel most supported? So maybe water makes you feel drained, and you have people that have a lot of water characteristics in your life and they drain you. And so it's helpful to know, just so that when you feel depleted or if you need more support, you know what sorts of natural elements you can bring around you in your home, or through people, or even by traveling there, will rejuvenate you.
And how do you recommend, do you recommend people just sort of tune in that way? Or like I've also heard, like, look on your Chinese astrology and see which element you have the least of, and that's the element that you want to support yourself with the most. Like, how much do you take into account your own personal, the time you were born and your Chinese astrology?
So I have been educated in it, so I do take all those things in account. We can look up someone's 4 pillars. So not everyone knows that with your Chinese astrology, there's a year animal, but there's also an animal associated with your day, your time, and your month. That's why it's called 4 pillars. So you can also pick up, like, actually the most important element is actually that of your day, not of your year. So I'm a fire dragon, but really, I think you said you're a snake, right?
I'm a fire snake. Mm-hmm.
Fire snake. Okay. So you're, so you have a challenging year this year, but that's good. But really, it's not so much about being a fire dragon as much as my day master is yin wood. So that's one way that if you can, there's also websites, like I like Joey Yap, and he has a calculator, a Batsa calculator. So you can look up all your 4 pillars, and then you can look at your day master. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it's not what you have least of, because there's this particular way you calculate how many elements you have of each in your whole chart, looking at there's like how the heaven branches, or the heavenly stems and the earthly branches. It's very complicated, but
Right.
there's a lot of calculators. It's probably better if you work with a practitioner, but you can see if you're strong. Like I'm a weak yin wood. So that means that since water feeds wood and I'm a weak yin wood, then it's helpful for me. But if I was a strong yin wood, it would be a little bit more complicated. So I have to see what actually takes away from the yin wood that I have. So it's a little bit more complicated. So that's why if you're not going to work with a practitioner, I would say, or even if you do work with a practitioner, it's good to number one, check in with yourself and do that exploration and that contemplation. And people actually always know the answer. They know immediately. It's like the first thought, best thought. Another Chogyam Trungpa thing. He always says first thought, best thought. What is the first thing that comes into your head? If you could vacation anywhere to really rest and relax and rejuvenate, where would that be? And for me, it's like if I got a second home, I would never want to be in the middle of the woods unless there's a lake there. Like I know, like I just that's what makes my heart sing, to be around water. So what makes your heart sing is really something to tap into, and you know your own answers.
And how would you apply that to your own space? Like as you're creating a comfortable bedroom or house or living space or office or big building, how do you continue to follow not a prescription, but what makes your heart sing and have that be of benefit to others?
Well, I would say most people get a sense of a space as soon as they walk in, as soon as they cross the threshold. And actually you start to see the energy before you even approach the space. You can pick up things on your way to a space. Like if you say you're looking for a new home or you're on your way to meet someone and a lot of mishaps happen on the way, that's a clue that something maybe is not going to be supportive for you in that space. And then when you walk into the space, how does your heart feel? How do you touch in with it? How's the energy feel? And do you love it? Especially if you're finding a new space, because there's never going to be the perfect feng shui, because that's just not how this world works. We don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world with complexities. So touch into how you feel in that space. Do you feel nervous? Do you feel at home? Do you feel comfortable? And there may be areas of your home that you actually like. Some people have rooms you never go into, or closets that they never open, or an area that creates a lot of stress in their lives. And so in the sense that, how we were talking about challenges are helpful, or Bengali tea boys are teachings, maybe those areas that cause irritation for you are the places where you can put some attention instead of avoiding them. Because when you avoid those areas, that takes a lot of energy to mentally, you may not be aware of it, but mentally your mind is doing a lot of somersaults trying to avoid thinking about that area you're avoiding. So it's helpful to look at those places in your home that are ignored or that you don't want to deal with, and maybe place some attention there and some loving kindness to that part of your home, even like the dark corners or the top of your cabinets, and give them a dusting and bring in some new energy.
Yeah, I remember when I bought my first house, I wasn't looking to buy a house. I was looking for space to rent for my office. And I remember being so taken aback because this woman who was supposed to be helping me look for spaces to rent, she was like, "Oh, there's this house like a couple of blocks down. Let's just go look at it." And it was like the moment I walked in the door, I was like, "Oh, but this is my house." Like I just felt so, and not in like a possessive way, but just such a settled way, and such a knowing like, this is my house, and then I ended up buying it, and we had our office there for 10 years, not as a living space, but as an office. And I thought that was so curious, that, like you said, you just have a knowingness. And if we
Mm-hmm.
have the courage to trust that knowingness, it's like the first thought, best thought, like the lack of hesitation and just being able to act on that first sensation, because she was like, well, let's go look at like 20 more houses. I don't even need to do that. I mean, I think we probably looked at 3 or 4 more, and I thought, this is just a waste of time, right? Because when you hit the right one, you just know.
And that's where I see a lot of people, they do know the right thing, and then they doubt themselves and they second guess themselves. And it's so exhausting it's fine. They're paying me to examine to go through all these options with them, no problem. And I know it's something that they need to do, but it's really this interesting phenomenon that happens with a lot of people, is that they know the right thing or the best thing for them, and then they have to go look at 20 other things, and then they circle back to the right thing, and then they feel okay about it. But it's interesting that it's so exhausting, and you develop this decision fatigue, and then you just end up where you started. And so all of us are doing this so often in our lives, that instead of trusting our first thought and our intuition, we just second guess ourselves. And that's why just these little things, like thinking about where you would want a vacation, that's a fun thing to do, right? And those are just small ways that you can start to get used to trusting yourself.
What's really interesting too is things are always changing, right? Like I was watching your Insta stories live this morning about the different, Happy New Year and the different signs and what this year would, be, what kind of experience it would be for them. And that's the interesting thing about the complexities and the dynamic nature of life, is every year is changing, right? So you may one year say, wow, I really want to go to Iceland. There's something there that's calling me, or I really want to go to Costa Rica, or I really feel drawn to Japan, or there's something in me that wants to go to Spain, or wherever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That also may be what you need dynamically for that particular time period, not all the time.
Yes. And I think when you're in touch with the phenomenal world and you can slow down and see things around you, you also start to see that there's so many things pointing to that thing that you're drawn to. Like, right, the synchronicity, you're like, okay, well, like you're looking for an office, you see a house, then she just happens to take you there. Like, it happens all the time. And so say I want to do something, and then this happens, and then I have like 5 fingers pointing at the thing I need to do. And all I had to do was open my eyes to the messages that the phenomenal world, this wonderful world, had to offer. And then we don't have to spend all this energy exhausting ourselves running around in circles. We can just trust that we received the right answer and the best answer and the best thing for us to do at that time. And it may be different than what we expected. And if it doesn't work out, it's okay. What's the big deal? Just, what's the worst that can happen? You go to Iceland.
So tell me how you do that. How do you stop, slow down, and listen to the signs? Like, are you literally listening to the breeze and the trees and the birds, or the people, or the messages, or the words you see on the street? Like, without getting into like a overly, making up stories and being too obsessive about it. How do you personally listen to those fingers pointing the right way?
It's not a direct thing, but it's 100% meditation practice. So just doing sitting practice, where I know a lot of people like guided meditations, but not guided meditations, just sitting practice with nothing to entertain you. And I've done a lot of week-long meditation retreats, and it's just incredible. And the longest one I've done is, I think, a week. I did a 9-day where I was teaching, so that doesn't really count. But there is just this transformation that happens, and it's not an A plus B equals C. It just happens. So I think because we slow down, we get to know ourselves, and we see the flow of thoughts that come up. And then at some point you become so exhausted by your own mind and then these breakthroughs happen. So it's so amazing. Just by practicing meditation, you have all these benefits of being able to slow down, seeing the world differently. The last retreat I did, one of the participants, it was interesting because he was really irritating me because he was breathing too loud. He was breathing so loud. And then, and it was funny because other participants were noticing, and then we were all kind of making veiled comments about it during the talks. And then we were doing mindful eating during each lunchtime. And at the end of the week, this participant who I was going to, kill during the practice, he was talking about during the mindful eating, he ate an apple every day, and how he never realized one apple could have so many different flavors. And it was so beautiful. And it's just doing the sitting practice creates the environment in which to begin to slow down, to see, to appreciate yourself and appreciate the world, and see the interconnectedness of all life. So it's really just sitting and meditating.
Yeah, it's like it strips away the thoughts and the intellectual storyline and the making up stories, and just sits you into your knowingness and your listening. When you know, there's nothing to even think about. You just know. It just hits you,
Yes. And some people say, "Oh, I don't have time. I can't sit down and practice." And I used to be like that too. I was a kind of meditator for like 10 years.
I love that. A kind of meditator.
Yes. And actually, when I started working with my meditation instructor, because he had said that, he said, I knew someone that kind of meditated for 10 years. And I realized like that was me. And I realized, you know what, I don't want to be do this halfway. I'm going to really dive in and practice. And a lot of things shifted when I made that decision. So a lot of people start to say, "Oh, I can't sit for 5 minutes. I have no time." And I think that's so sad that you can't even take 5 minutes for yourself every day, that you're so busy that you can't take 5 minutes to be with yourself. And everyone can just start with 5 minutes a day.
I think that there's some kind of disconnect. There's like a little bit of a disconnect between, like hard work and sitting, because I think we push ourselves and work so hard that many people have this idea that, sitting there for 5 minutes is like you're like a drill sergeant. You're going to sit down and you're going to sit there for 5 minutes, right? And then like, it's like anytime you bring up meditation, people will be like, "Oh, I can't do that. My mind's so busy." And then there comes the subsequent like discussion of like, well, everyone's mind is busy. Like the point isn't to have a blank mind and have no thoughts. It's really just to soften and sit with yourself. And like the way you're describing it, it's like being your own best friend. Like take 5 minutes every day to be your own best friend, and just tune in with what you need and listen.
Exactly.
And be there. And so I think really what our job is to do is to bring it to people in that way, like to bring it to people not in a way of like harsh discipline and you gotta like, this is like your for your gym membership, now you're gonna get on that treadmill. It's like that every day is like so dynamic and complex and full of listening and softening and seeing your own crap and filling it with compassion. And it's like there's it's so rich. But I think that meditation has become this sort of trendy thing, and it's very two-dimensional, and maybe people just haven't had an experience of how complex and incredible and how the results can be absolutely life-changing. It reminded me when you were talking about breathing and the guy who breathes too loudly. It brought me back to this moment about 2 weeks ago, like in this like absolutely magical window of time and space, right after I watched my dog take her last breaths, and she died of a natural death I was like super committed to let her go when she wanted to go. And it was so interesting because the whole room just filled up with so much silence, or appeared to me. It was the middle of the night. And there were 2 other people in the room who were kind of crashed out in the living room because we were there to support her. And they were asleep. I was the only one that was awake to kind of witness this totally magical and transformative moment. And after she was gone, obviously she stopped breathing. The only thing I could hear in the room was their breathing in their sleep. And when people are breathing in their sleep, it's this like luscious, relaxed, wide open kind of breathing. I could hear Kate breathing. I could hear my teacher breathing. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is the only thing that separates this from that. Like how incredibly fragile life is, and how just like translucent and transparent. Like how I just watched my best friend of almost 17 years just like slip out because she couldn't breathe anymore. And in the moment I was like, oh my God, like how could I not be aware of a single breath I take? Like how could I let one breath of mine go by without being aware of it? It's like, it seemed so clear in the moment. And yet, like how many breaths have I already taken this morning that I wasn't aware of? But in the moment, it was just like rocked me to my core of like how incredibly precious every single breath is. How could we not be possibly, awake and aware of every one of them?
Yeah, and that's vital to life, because if someone's passed, you can't put breath back into them. That life energy is left. And then it's when on that last exhale, like your life energy is mixing in with the whole environment. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing. There's so much there, even just with the breath, focusing on the breath.
I know that in the Eastern traditions, I don't know if you've heard this, but they say that like from the moment you're born, you have a determined amount of breaths. And so like the teachers are always saying like, slow down your breathing, like you have a longer life.
Yeah, I have heard that actually. And actually I wanted to touch back into something you were saying about meditation practice. One thing that I love about Chogyam Trungpa's approach is that even if you are that drill sergeant and being super self-critical when you're sitting there, like I am when I first started my flower practice, but even now, sometimes I look at a flower arrangement, I'm like, oh, I hate it. And the beautiful thing is that is all included in your experience. And that's really something that changed my life, is that I'm very self-critical, and knowing that every experience is included and it's okay and it's acceptable is life-changing. So when you sit there or you do anything, whatever emotion comes up, if it's negative, positive, it's included and it's okay and acceptable, even if you're a drill sergeant. Because at some point you'll get tired of being a drill sergeant.
Right. Well, and I think, yeah, you get, as you observe more and more, you see like you can have the drill sergeant in the room, and you can have the soft one in the room, and you can have the rebellious one that wants to go out and do crazy things in the room. And you can have like all of those characters can be in the room at the same time. And some of them are like protecting, right? Like your drill sergeant might actually be protecting you from that rebellious one that wants to go do that thing that you're like afraid if you just went nuts, you'd, let that one take charge. And so it's like this whole funny dynamic of like inner protectors.
Yes, and that's where all the elements come in too. It's not that you want one or the other. You want a balance of all of them. So I have a name for my drill sergeant. My drill sergeant is General Cho's chicken.
Are you kidding me? I love that.
Yeah. And so sometimes, because I coordinate a lot of classes for my teachers, and they'll think, "Oh, General Cho's back." But then sometimes that's what's required, right? That cutting energy, or that fierce, like, the blend that you have, the fierce compassion, like those fierce deities that cut through. That's necessary too. Sometimes we have to be the general. Sometimes we can be more open, and we're flexible, and we're always moving through all these different energies.
I love it. I could talk to you all day. We have so much we could talk about. I think I need to have you on the podcast again. I want to try to wrap up so we don't go too long, and I know you have things on your plate today. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your work with Mindful Design School and how people can stay in touch with you. I know you, it's so funny. Before we hit the record button, Anjie and I were talking, and she was saying how there's like so many people asking questions that she's got this backlog of being able to answer for, your question will be answered in 9 months. So we were joking about, like, if you have questions, we'll answer them in 2020. But yeah, talk a little bit more about your work with your new school.
Sure. So my partner and I, Laura Morris, we started a feng shui school called Mindful Design. And what we saw is we really love our teachers, and the feng shui that we practice is called BTB feng shui, and it's very lineage based, and it's based on Tibetan Buddhism and Chinese folklore. So it has all these roots. So lineage is super important, as well as transcendental secret methods, and meditation and mindfulness is all just as important as moving your bed around. Actually, it's probably, well, they're both equally as important. You need the mundane, and you need the transcendental. So we're practicing both together. We've been practicing over 2 decades, and our teachers are now getting older, and there's the school that we practiced in. We studied in a 3-year program. Our teachers are dissolving that program, and they're getting older. So we receive blessings from our teachers to be able to continue these feng shui teachings. So we really want to share this information and this knowledge in a traditional way by passing on through lineage with transmissions. And we want to equip people with the tools to use feng shui and to share it with others and to become consultants, and have really be able to show them the importance of connecting with mindfulness, with meditation, with changing your own personal chi. Your inner environment is as important as your outer. So there's all these paradoxes, right? Working with your inner and your outer, and your inner reflects your outer. And so as much as you want to move something around in your house to make your whole life change, there's also other things you need to do. So just like Katie, you have your flower essences, your flower elixirs, but also meditation is important too. And even on a secular level, even if you're taking, say, antidepressants, they always recommend you do the therapy too. So it's always about working with the inner and the outer, and knowing that we're all interconnected. I mean, that's the main thing, that we're all interconnected. So anyway, so we're teaching now the certification program, and we're having fun offering little mini courses as well. So we're actually going to give one away together for LOTUSWEI on the podcast. And we're launching a new course called Feng Shui Love Story, where we are sharing some feng shui methods to create your own love story, whether that means inviting a new partner in your life, working on an existing relationship, or inviting self-love and working with loving yourself, or maybe it's, well, I guess it wouldn't be all 3 of those things, but 2 or 3 of those things. So love is a huge thing, and that's what a lot of people ask us about. So, but anyways, we're really excited to be able to now teach, because we want to help more people, and not just the people we would do consultations for, but to share these teachings and also really go teach on a deep level.
I love that. Okay, so we'll have all the information about the Feng Shui Love Story on our podcast blog post. And I wondered, in wrapping up, if you could talk a little bit about your personal practice this year on being aware of your speech. I think that's really meaningful and noble.
So I think I've spent a lot of my life working on my mind and working on my spirit. And that's really easy to do. There's many self-help books out there and many things that you could buy, flower elixirs and feng shui books, and so much we can do to work on ourselves. And last year I also, well, actually after I turned 40, the last couple of years, I've been working on my body, and I realized there was an imbalance, that I was just focusing on my mind and not my body. And so I'm working on that, integrating Kundalini yoga and just being more in touch with my physical body and how I manifest in the world in that sense. And then I realized there's this whole other area that I haven't been looking at, which is my speech. And this is where it's been more challenging for me, because I realized for the first time in my life I'm doing things and embracing things that I'm not naturally gifted at. Because I would always just have things fall into my lap and just go with them, and it was pretty easy. And now things are still falling into my lap, but they involve challenges where I have to learn new skills. And communication is a huge thing, where it's a balance of wanting to share and connecting with people, but also using the right speech, like I'm really cutting down, or I'm trying to eliminate, I will eliminate no more complaining, no more gossiping, which I like to gossip sometimes, and being okay with misunderstanding, not having to explain everything. And there's this beautiful visual that I read recently in The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa, and he talks about being a stringed instrument. Your mindfulness in speech is being a stringed instrument with the strings disengaged. And it's an interesting koan and visual, but what I was taking it as is we have this potential to share and communicate, but not needing to do that. So we don't have to engage the strings and have it be heard, but the potential is still there. Like one of my teachers was saying that there's a story about Stevie Wonder, and he went into this room, and there was a piano. It was a big room and just a piano somewhere in the room. And he was able just to walk directly to it and sat at the piano. And he said that even the piano, without being played, without being engaged, already had its own vibration that he could actually hear. And that if all of us could slow down and pay attention, we could hear that vibration. So I think that's a wonderful way of looking at this communication, that we have all these things that we want to share. We want to be understood as humans, but we don't have to actually say anything. We could just be, and to just be mindful about speech. That's my goal this year.
You know what is so interesting? We did a retreat in Costa Rica in November, and one of those days of the 7 days was a silent day, and it was fascinating. There were 17 of us, and the most connected that everyone became, like incredible bonds of connection, happened on the day that no one said a word. And it was like everyone could experience the freedom of not having to, do I have to say something? Do I have to? It's like remove this kind of whole layer of things, so that, like you said, you could just be, and people could see who you are without having words get in the way. And that was pretty surprising. So I think like bringing some of that into every day is really powerful. And like you said, not worrying about having to explain yourself, or
Yes, just sitting with misunderstandings, because chatter can make us blind. We miss all the messages that the universe has to offer us when we're too busy chattering about or replaying things in our mind, whatever, if it's internal chatter or whatever. Yeah, I love silence at retreats. It's refreshing.
And so every day you are being aware of how, like, the words that you're using and how you're engaging your speech.
I'm working on it.
I love it.
It's about, I think it's pausing and slowing down and checking myself.
Have this little, I still do actually, in my pecha, in my, my practice, like texts, this little line that I pulled from a TV show. What is that called? Kung Fu. And the guy says, his character says, if my words are not better than silence, I will keep silent. It was kind of like this. Every day I would repeat it to myself. So if you had some words of wisdom or last little nuggets of advice, or just something that naturally springs up from your heart in this moment for the listeners, what would you offer?
I encourage everyone to take some time to sit with themselves in meditation practice, because there's so much that you can begin to see and really begin to appreciate life and see the magic in everyday life. And when you can open your eyes to that and become more awake, it's truly amazing what life has to present to you. Like, literally, I have things just that fall at my feet, and all I have to do is accept them and walk towards them or say no to them. And I think everyone has that ability to transform and enjoy and love their lives.
Love it. More sitting quietly, more being our own best friend.
Yes. Saying, hi, Angie, how are you feeling today? In one word. Just even that, and then just contemplating that for 5 minutes is so transformative.
And if people want more of you, Angie, and more of your teachings and trainings, where should they go? Where's the best place to go? Except not expect an answer till 2020. No, but you give away tons of stuff on your blog and your podcast and everything. So
they can go to anjiecho.com. ANJIECHO.
What's the name of your podcast?
The podcast is the Holistic Spaces Podcast.
Awesome. And that's also the name of her book. So if you want to check out the Holistic Spaces book, are we doing a giveaway?
Yes, we're giving away the book too.
Yay. Awesome.
The book, the Feng Shui Love Story course, and I'm sure you'll throw something in.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. We can throw in some flower elixirs. Yeah, we'll do a big giveaway on Instagram. So thank you so much for your time, Angie. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I've loved spiraling, circling back with you in so many of the ways that we meet in the, oh my God, your photo shoots with the ginkgo leaves. Stunning, stunning, stunning. We have to post some of those photos.
Yes,
and
I love them.
The botanical ceremony we did together. You came to the beautiful, I was thinking this morning as I was getting ready for this, you came to that tiny little circle we did before, like the night before we had our book launch.
Oh yeah, that's where I met Diane.
Yeah. Oh shoot. Do you want to talk about that totally random side note, side hustle? Get a new business you're starting? Do you want to just in case people have little dogs?
So Katie introduced me to Diane from Modern Minerals, and we became good friends. And now we're starting a side business, which has nothing to, well, I guess it doesn't really have anything to do with feng shui or makeup. She does green beauty, or actually her company's now Momi Beauty. Mm-hmm. And she has, Katie's flower elixirs in her products. We're starting a new business called Gemma and Pearl, because we both have dogs under 10 pounds. So we're going to create some products for dogs under 10. So it's the under 10 club. So Katie, you have to get a dog under 10 pounds.
Okay, I'll work on it. All our versions are so big.
No, well, so
It's
it's
nice to have
gonna.
a little pocket-sized one, right? Because then you could, like, go to Asia and bring your dog with you and
Hmm. Well, I'm actually flying to LA today and bringing 2 chihuahuas with me.
aw.
They fit in one bag together.
Oh my god, that's adorable. Your seatmates must love sitting next to you.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. Everyone's always like, "This made my day to sit next to you."
Aw. Super. Well, can't wait to see more about your new business and all of the existing things you've got going on. I've loved
Thank
watching you
you.
evolve and transform, and I love talking to you, Anjie. Thanks for being
Thank
with
you. Thank you. So much fun.
us. Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.